dictatorship, and the policy was reissued with minor modifications in 1987, shortly after the People Power Revolution. The BEP at that time, the government's interpretation of the language provisions of the Philippine Constitution, which states, and I'd like to quote, "For the purposes of communication and instruction, the official languages of the Philippines are Filipino and, until otherwise provided by law, English." The goal of the BEP was to develop bilingual Filipinos competent in both English and the national language, Filipino. The desire for competence in English is driven by the goal of economic competitiveness. It was also the hope of the BEP that students would learn to appreciate their national identity through the Filipino language. Okay, now, the BEP was widely criticized for many reasons. One being the perception that it did not contribute significantly to upgrading the students' mastery of any language, nor of the content areas. An example often provided to support this criticism was the consistently low performance Filipino students have been getting in international tests of science and mathematics, which are always written in English. Filipino linguists Bonifacio Sibayan and Andrew Gonzalez, who later became Secretary of Education, through studies of the Linguistic Society of the Philippines in the 1990s, have also reported that the BEP did not help develop among students a sense of nationalism and love of their national language. In other words, the BEP failed to push forward the agenda of either English or Filipino. Okay? Another criticism of the BEP was that the policy was found to be elitist. According to Gonzalez, students in high-quality private schools in the economic centers were found to have benefited most from the policy. Okay? This means that, considering the ratio of public school to private school students in the Philippines, the policy failed to support the needs of at least 80% of school children in the country. Okay? Thus, from the viewpoint of the dismal failure of the bilingual education policy, the current MTB-MLE policy is approached as the most appropriate alternative, a sort of all-purpose cure for whatever ailment Philippine education was suffering from. If MTB-MLE were a Marvel superhero, okay, I think it would be Wonder Woman. Okay? Intelligent, strong, versatile, rooted in tradition, yet negotiating both the local and the global. And I'd also like to add is that the movers and shakers of MTB-MLE in the Philippines were mostly women. They're here in this forum, actually. I will call them maybe later. They're mostly women, so that's why I chose Wonder Woman. Okay. Now, as regards accomplishments of the policy, it is relatively new. So it may take some time before we see the benefits. However, there are many reports from the field, and initial observations and studies have been conducted by many of the people here. We have Skoporinsky, did I get that right? Diane Decker's here, Catherine Young's here, we have Dino Ocampo, Rose Valinas is not here, but she has also a lot to say about that. Ched Arsanan is also here, mostly all women actually, who have written about the accomplishments of the policy. And these reports, some initial observations and studies revealed that MTB-MLE students are more motivated to participate in the classroom for the obvious reason that they can understand the teacher talks to them in a language that they know. Because of this, it was observed that there was a decline in student absences and dropouts. And for teachers, they were found to be more at ease in the classroom with smoother relationships with their students. For the community, there is more awareness of and pride in the mother tongues. Community members were involved in curriculum design, preparation of instructional materials, and even in teacher training. They were resource persons that the community asked them to help train teachers who taught the mother tongues. And with MTB-MLE, parents who are not proficient in the dominant languages could actually now assist their children in their homework assignments. Okay. Now, I really believe that with the implementation of MTB-MLE, there's really no turning back for Philippine education. for me, MTBMLE is this definitive and defining. However, it is also a work in progress with the usual birth pains of any new national education policy. Now, what are the challenges that the policy faces? What are current criticisms of this policy? I'm going to talk about that the next slides. Okay, first, okay, as in any new education policy, okay, the teachers were most anxious about MTBMLE. Okay? Although many teachers have reported that they were already using the mother tongues before the policy was introduced, having MT as a subject was a different ballgame. In this policy, the mother tongue is medium of instruction and also a subject, okay, at the same time. So it was quite challenging to have it as a subject, okay, to teach it as a subject. The teachers were anxious about how prepared they were to teach MT as a subject and as an MOI. And then there was the question of instructional materials. It's always a question. What expenses are involved in producing the materials? How soon can these materials be introduced? And then the perennial question of should these materials be translated? And we know that translation is not always the solution, no, in situations like this. Okay? And what about teacher training to prepare for using the materials? It takes a lot of time. Now, other than the teachers, parents and other stakeholders were also resistant to the new policy. Foremost was the question about learning English. Parents asked, with MTBMLE, will my children learn English? Okay. From employers, there was the question of employability. They argued that MTBMLE will produce graduates who are not proficient in English and therefore of poor quality that they cannot employ, especially in the call center industry. The Philippines has a very, very strong and vibrant call center industry, which we know is dependent on the English language. Even lawmakers, despite having the MTBMLE policy now, continue to push for English. Just 2 years ago, 2017, Pampanga Representative Gloria Arroyo filed House Bill 5091, which seeks to use English as MOI in 70% of school subjects, limiting the use of Filipino to only 10%. So there's still these attempts, no, to, I suppose, to undermine the existing policy. There are also reports of mismatch between the mother tongue selected by the authorities or the mother tongues used in the materials and the mother tongue used in the community, the actual mother tongues used in the community. For example, in a recent project I'm currently involved in, mother tongue teachers in a city in Mindanao reported that they could not understand some of the words used in their science textbooks. These teachers reported that they had to consult their relatives in the Visayas to verify the meaning of the words. Okay. Then there is also the challenge of teaching guides that are written in English and used alongside instructional materials written in the mother tongue. Okay, so there are several challenges that the policy faces. Then as in any MLE policy, there's always the question of orthography development. Okay? This is, of course, is understandable since developing orthography takes a lot of time and resources. Developing takes time. Standardizing it is even more challenging. Okay? There will be a lot of disagreements. Okay? In the Philippines, language issues can tend to be emotional, as we know, because we attach identities, no, to our languages. So you would expect debates and disagreements on issues of standards, which may actually slow down the process of standardizing the orthography of a mother tongue. Okay, and then there is the issue of early exit or short exit. From the mother tongue, this was raised by concerned educational linguists at the outset of the implementation. Some argue that the mother tongue should be used as medium of instruction until the end of elementary schooling, with the introduction of English and Filipino postponed to as far as high school. But in the curriculum framework, which I shared earlier, the mother tongue is used until grade 3, and in another document that I found of the Department of Education, which is the English Curriculum Guide, we can see that English is introduced as early as the first grade in the third quarter. So there are a lot of criticisms about these provisions, no, in the current policy. Now, finally, attitudes towards languages in the Philippines remain biased against mother tongues. And this is true. This is true in many contexts, not just in the Philippines. Several attitudinal studies revealed this, and I'd like to quote just one, written by Bamboob and Cruz in 2013. I'd like to read out what they wrote. They quote unquote, "It is very important to take into account the hegemonic position of English in post-colonial societies like the Philippines when considering language policies, especially those that will impact local languages. While English is perceived to hold a position of power that is the key to socioeconomic and global opportunities, local languages will always remain in the margins. It is this perception that has to change for mother tongue policies to become truly empowering," close quote. Now, let me now proceed with two assumptions and mindsets in the discourse of MTB-MLE that may be counterproductive in gaining the benefits of the policy. I'll start first with a very brief, maybe just this slide, one slide, about the linguistic landscape of the Philippines. The Philippines is characterized by both multilingualism and linguistic diversity. Okay? These two characteristics are often taken to mean the same thing, but actually, if you think about it, they're not identical in meaning. They can be different. In multilingualism, the concern is individual languages. We're like counting. Now, more specifically, the focus is on the individuality of the languages. And so in this category of multilingualism, we count the languages, which in the Philippines is reported to be 185. Okay. Now, in contrast, when one talks about diversity or linguistic diversity, the focus is more on the interaction of the languages, how the languages come into contact with each other. And linguistic diversity, we also know, measured by the Greenberg Diversity Index, tells us about the extent to which individual languages come into contact. And when languages come into contact, many wonderful things happen, including the birth of new languages. Okay? Now, language contact is one of the driving forces of language variation, which is a natural behavior of all languages. And in the Philippines, we enjoy a high diversity index. No? It's high in a scale of 0 to 1. Now, in the discourse about MTB-MLE in the Philippines, it seems that there is more appreciation of multilingualism, the individual languages, rather than linguistic diversity. Okay? This mindset can be seen in some of the assumptions that are implicit in the discourse of MTB-MLE in the Philippines, and I would like to surface these assumptions by raising some questions. Okay? So first, in a multilingual and linguistically diverse context, such as the Philippines, how should mother tongue be regarded, as singular or plural? We know that we can have several mother tongues, but in Philippine discourse, it seems like we're expected to have just one mother tongue. Okay? In multilingual and linguistically diverse communities, is it possible for one person to have more than one mother tongue? Yes. Is this reality of multiple mother tongues considered in the delivery of MTB-MLE in the classroom? What does it mean to have more than one mother tongue? Now, in the context of literacy, this question has many implications, but the answer also depends on which mother tongues the child acquires at a young age. Okay, second, in multilingual and linguistically diverse communities, are boundaries between languages really that clear-cut and absolute? Do speakers speak in one language all the time? Doesn't code switching, code meshing, and even the now fashionable translingual practice also take place? Growing up in a multilingual and linguistically diverse community, do 5-year-old kindergarten children know the differences between the languages they use? In the same way that we resist English-only policies, shouldn't we also resist the one-language policy, whatever that language is, in our teaching practice? In some circles, that's called the fallacy of linguistic purity. Okay. just some questions to ponder, no, to ponder on. The third, in multilingual and linguistically diverse communities, can languages coexist? Okay? Must languages fight each other? We know, of course, that languages don't fight. People do. But if we look at the many arguments raised for or against a language, at least in the context of the Philippines, we will see that the arguments rest on the mindset of why this and not that, rather than why not this and that. So these are just some questions to ponder, no, as we reflect on our MTB-MLE practice. Finally, that monster called English. Okay. Isn't English also a mother tongue in the Philippines as well? Okay. Aren't there Filipino children who are growing up with English as a mother tongue together with another Philippine language? I ask this question not only because of the data I have collected from public elementary schools in the Visayas and Mindanao, but also the spread and diffusion of English language has been so phenomenal that anyone can now call it her own. Okay? Hence, Englishes, okay? And not the singular English. There are many paradigms and scholarly work that support this idea of the pluricentricity of English, the plurality of centers of the English language. There's the World Englishes paradigm promoted by Braj Kachru. And there's also English as a lingua franca. I know it sounds kind of weird because our knowledge of lingua franca is different. And then sort of like do not connect English to it. But English can be a lingua franca. Okay. These paradigms are promoted by Cyril Hofer and Widdowson. There's actually much to say about the English language, but I'm not sure if this is the forum for this. Okay. I'm just going down to my last slide, brief presentation. So by way of concluding the presentation, I'd like to go back to this rather old document. I wasn't born yet when this was written. A 1953 document published by UNESCO entitled The Use of Vernacular Languages in Education. I'm sure many of you in this forum are quite familiar with this document put together by a group of language specialists in Paris in 1951. And I'd like to read this. We take it as axiomatic that every child of school age should attend school and that every illiterate should be made literate. We take it as axiomatic, too, that the best medium for teaching is the mother tongue of the pupil. But with many hundreds of languages lacking a written form, or when they have one, any literature for the use of pupils, it is difficult at present for both these aims to be pursued. Yet, all languages, even the so-called primitive ones, are capable of becoming media of school teaching, some perhaps merely as a bridge to a second language, while others may be used at all levels of education. But while this is true linguistically, there are many other factors, social, political, economic, and practical, which impede the development of these languages or even the employment of certain languages already well suited to be used in education. Some of these difficulties may be promptly overcome, such as orthography. Others, social and political, at best, may take much longer. The Philippine MTB-MLE policy is still a work in progress, and as the quote has indicated, the difficulties the policy is encountering may be promptly overcome. But there are also social and political forces that may slow down its progress. Among these forces are mindsets that have not genuinely embraced both the multilingual and the linguistically diverse characteristics of languages in the country. If linguistic boundaries are softened rather than sharpened, if languages are allowed to genuinely interact with each other, perhaps some of the challenges of the policy might be more effectively overcome. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm not done yet.
Thank you very much. I was just on holiday in the UK for about a month, in Scotland and Wales much of the time, and I didn't understand half of what was being said. So different Englishes there. We have about 10 minutes for questions until the end of the session. Anyone have some for this very challenging talk? Over here first.
Tony, Professor Igalinos, Tony. Yeah. Sorry, he's one of the male movers and shakers
Okay,
of
and
the
then over here.
policy.
Yeah, you mentioned about short exit.
Yes, yes.
Very shortly.
Yeah.
About a month ago, the Department of Education issued Department Order number 21. And in that document, essentially, when it comes to the short exit, it just made the short exit shorter. So the exposure as it is today is that learners in the early grades from grades 1 to 3 have exposure to MTB, but DO21 further shortened it. So how do we therefore address problem? Because to me, this is the elephant in the room, the built-in exclusionary measure that's built right in the policy design. How do we address that?
Yeah, well, of course.
We're talking about
yeah.
inclusion, but the chief state agency, for example, is the one authoring that exclusionary measure.
Yeah, that's
I think that's valid for all contexts.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
What Tony is referring to is, and I think I mentioned it, English, di ba, Tony, is actually introduced as early as grade 1, third quarter. That's already in the English curriculum guide. So DO 21 sort of like just repeated what's already in the curriculum guide. How to address it? We really have to go to the ministry. We have to work with the ministry. We have to work with our Department of Education. And I think that we've been doing that, questioning the short exit provision of the policy. What we haven't asked is why they're doing it. I'm not sure if there are reasons behind that, why they're introducing English that early on in the policy. But it's really a concern. It's a valid concern, the early exit from the mother tongue.
Okay. I mean, in many good models, as you know, the national language or English might be introduced orally early on.
Yes.
To get children used to the sounds, but not
Yeah.
necessarily in
It's
terms of
orally.
reading. And that's
Yes.
one of the issues. There was a question back here in the corner. No? Question? Yes.
There's another gentleman there.
I am participating from Nepal. I am eager to know about government policy and practice regarding teacher development for MTB MLE in Philippines.
What is the policy?
Government policy regarding teacher training and development and best practice in Philippines
Yeah, that's
for regarding to develop MTB MLE.
yeah. That there's a lot to say about teacher development. One of the challenges actually, and I think Ched is here. Maybe Ched can help us, and Dina. Ched and Dina. At the beginning, when they had to roll out MTB MLE, they had to cram the teacher training. You know, because the Department of Education is a very, very big bureaucracy. It's a very, very big government agency. So they had to cram. They had to put the teachers in big, fora like this and to cram. And then also they had more localized teacher training. So other than the central, they also had local teacher training. So I can't say much about that because I don't have much experience on the local ground. But they did have local teacher training as well. I think what's very positive from the MTB MLE workshops are the big books, which Ched can talk about in her presentation. The big books, they produce a lot of what you call big books, okay? Because it's very expensive to be printing shiny, glossy books for the children in the different languages. The teachers created their own big books. And these have been very, very, very helpful in implementing the mother tongue policy.
One more question here, please.
Thank you. Obviously, if the children now are having English as a mother tongue, we need to soften our perception,
Yes.
which is quite clear. But now, in the case of the Philippines, which is a country which has gone far in terms of mother tongue education, which has gone far in terms of bilingual education, that is in the sense of having one foreign language and one local language. Now, what is the situation of those kids learning English first? Those who have English as their first language, what is the situation in the Philippines?
In the Philippines,
Yes.
what is the situation? What do you mean by the situation?
Their situation in terms of language learning. Do they have another language from the Philippines?
Yes.
That was
Yes,
the question.
they do. So the English, the Filipinos who have English as one of their mother tongues also have another mother tongue. So like in my case, I have three. So that's English, Tagalog, and well, it's not the mother tongue. It's a second language, Kinaraya. It's a Visayan language. So there are there's another Philippine language, not just English, that they know. Now, the argument I'm making about English as English mother tongue is not so much that I'm pushing for English, but that and this is also to echo what Psyche was saying earlier, to localize, which is another way of saying that we need to make more important decisions as close as possible to the classroom. In other words, it's good that we have a national policy, but it's top-down. It's top-down. It's good that it institutionalized. It's really good. But then when you go to the ground, the policy might not match the reality. So there may be a need to strengthen the ground, okay? So that the local is allowed to interpret the policy more realistically. So there are situations where the government will say, this is your mother tongue. Use that. But the community would say, but that's not our mother tongue. So how do we proceed? In another situation, they will say, this is your mother tongue. And they'd say, but our kids also know English. So can we not begin with that? So I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. You have a policy, that's good. And we're really proud that we have that. But then there are birth pains, and it has to be matched with the realities from the ground so that you get a really good mix of the local and the central government policy. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing about that. I was in Malaysia maybe 10 years ago speaking to a group of parents of relatively elite schools and was giving the usual speech about the importance of mother tongue and the rather bad language